I want to remind you that this event is webinar format, so you can see and hear us, but we cannot hear and see you. We are hoping to have some extra time at the end of the event to take some questions. So if you have any questions for Liz Hill, please feel free to put them in the chat. This event is also being recorded. You will receive a link to the recording by the end of next week. If you have any questions regarding the event, please feel free to send either me or Taisha a chat, or you can email us at info@scmediation.org. At this time, I'd now like to introduce our event hosts, Jennifer Johnson-Toronto and Richard Earhart.
Okay, thank you, Bouvier. I'm Jennifer Johnston-Toronto, and I'm so pleased to have everybody here with us today. One of the primary goals of SCMA's How I Made It series is to showcase the different career paths of mediators, both to inspire our members in terms of the various opportunities they can pursue, but also for the professional that we're featuring to discuss how they got where they are and to offer some real world advice to people who may be interested in pursuing a similar path. So today I'm particularly excited to feature an ombuds on How I Made It. Ombuds or ombudsman, we'll talk about that in a minute, is a form of alternative dispute resolution that has differences and similarities to mediation. So we are so pleased to have Elizabeth Schwartz-Hill, Associate Director, the Ombuds Office, University of Colorado Boulder, with us today to share her story and information about the ombuds profession, including opportunities within the profession and what steps to take if you're interested in pursuing a career as an ombuds. To tell you a little bit about Liz, before joining the University of Colorado Boulder Ombuds Office, she served as an Arizona Assistant Attorney General, Assistant Ombuds for the state of Arizona, and an Ombudsman for Apollo Education Group. She is a graduate of Gonzaga University School of Law and holds a BS from Northern Arizona University. She is also a trained mediator and a certified organizational ombuds practitioner. She is a member of the State Bar of Arizona International Ombuds Association, and she's an active ABA dispute resolution section member, where she serves on the Dispute Resolution Council and its executive committee as marketing officer and marketing committee chair. And one other thing we'll talk about today, she's also the chair of the International Ombudsman Association Certified Organizational Ombuds Practitioner Recertification Committee, which is a lot of words, but for anyone that is involved with SCMA and knows about the efforts to certify mediators, this is a similar effort for ombuds, and we will talk about that today. So welcome, Liz. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today in what is certain to be an interesting and informative conversation.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Great. And I think the best place to start is if you will tell us in general terms, what is an ombuds and what is the proper term for an ombuds? Yes. Or are different terms used?
Yes, I know it's all very confusing. I know. So let me just start by saying, despite the fact that ombuds, are not well known, right, and are often misunderstood, it's actually been around for a really long time. So the ombudsman role was first established in Sweden back in the 1700s. So it's not, some people say, oh, is this a new profession? So it's not really new. Has it evolved? Yes. And, that brings us to, some of the terminology, which we'll get to, but just really brief. The ombudsman, if you were to Google it, right, or go to Wikipedia, the definition would say agent or representative. And as we'll be talking about today, many modern ombuds or even ombudsmen don't truly fit that mold. That doesn't really accurately describe the role that we play for government or institutions or wherever we're working. Now you hit on the terminology ombuds and ombudsman, and as we were discussing, that really depends on who you talk to. So ombudsman is the official original term that was used. it then evolved into ombudswoman or ombudsperson, right? Depending on the organization you're working for and the person holding the position, what their preference might have been or what their statutory legislation said. And many, especially in the classical ombuds role that we'll talk about, still maintain the original term ombudsman. I go by ombuds, as do many of my organizational ombuds colleagues, and do other public sector ombuds are now starting to transition. And part of that, it really depends on what camp you're talking to, but there was, a big push, I would say, to remove the term man, like many other professions have done, to make it more gender neutral, right, and more inclusive. The other side of the fence, other camps would say that the ombudsman term in the Swedish linguistics is gender neutral, and so that is not an issue. So there's this ongoing tension, I don't even know if I'd call it a tension, but there's this ongoing discussion of what the proper term, but substantively, the terminology isn't what makes the distinction. There's different models that we'll talk about that make the distinction of the role and what the people do. So my advice to anyone on this call who's concerned about, what to call someone, ask them, what term do they use? What do they prefer? How do they describe themselves?
That's really great advice. I think that's the best advice that could be applied globally. Just ask people what their preference is.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us, you're the Associate Director of the University of Colorado Boulder Ombuds Office. Why don't you tell us about that role and what you do in that role?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So, well, I didn't really get into the type, so maybe it'd be helpful for me just to touch on that real quick before I go into mine, because my role at the university is an organizational ombuds role. And so before I go down that path, it might be helpful for people in the audience who aren't familiar with the fact that there are really here in the US 3 different types of ombuds. There's the classical ombuds, organizational ombuds, and advocate ombuds. And I'm casting broad, wide nets here, because even within those 3 umbrellas or compartments, practices vary and roles vary. But just to give people a general idea, if I may, classical ombuds are the most akin to the original Swedish model, and they're often governed by statute. They do have some distinct features that other ombuds might not have, like investigatory authority, subpoena power, and they, when necessary, will make findings and recommendations to a governing body, for instance, in many cases, a state legislature. So many of the classical ombuds we see, there's 6 state ombudsmen are classical. They report through their state legislature. So that's the classical model. The organizational model, or actually let me touch on the advocate first. The advocate model is exactly that, right? They represent and they advocate for a particular constituent group. So here in the US, the most popular, the most common that you'll see, every state has to have one by federal law, are the long-term care ombudsmen. And so they will advocate for long-term care residents and or their families. And I won't get into the weeds on any of these, but like I said, they're governed by federal law and every state has to have one. Then there's the organizational ombuds, and that's what my role is, and I'll talk about my role in a moment. But we typically do not have statutory authority, and many of my organizational ombuds colleagues and I adhere to what are known as the International Ombudsman Association, now Ombuds, actually they just changed their name, International Ombuds Association standards of practice. And those are independence, informality, impartiality, and confidentiality. And often what they'll do is within their organizations, whether it's a government entity or a private entity, they'll establish charters or memorandums of understanding that really specify, the terms of their role, what they do, how they function, and who they serve. Because that varies too, right? What the jurisdiction is, so to speak. So I don't know, any questions, Jennifer or Richard, on that before I move on to my role?
I don't have a question on that. In fact, that's where I was going to go, though, in terms of my first question, Liz. But thank you for agreeing to do this as well. And when we met yesterday, I'm very excited about the opportunity to have you in this series, and I think people are really going to be in for a treat. Before we're done today, you're going to know an awful lot about the ombuds profession and how to go there if you would like to. So Liz, I do appreciate you doing this. Jennifer touched a bit, in terms of kind of giving a brief bio on you in terms of your background. So, I won't ask you to go into that, but you might touch on that in terms of did you seek out a career in ADR as an ombuds, or did it somehow come to you? How did this come by? How did this come to pass?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest with everybody here, very much happenstance. I dabbled, if I'm even being very gracious with that term. During law school, there weren't a whole lot of ADR courses really when I was in law school. And so, but I did take the ones that existed more out of curiosity than anything. But as Jennifer noted, ended up going into litigation, right, as a tax attorney, both for the Department of Revenue and then the Attorney General's office. And it wasn't until a mentor of mine at the Attorney General's office and it really wasn't a secret, but she really knew that I didn't love the adversarial process. I was fortunate. I got to appear before Board of Tax Appeals, Tax Court, Court of Appeals, which was great as a young lawyer. But it really did not align, like that process and that approach just really did not align with my personal values or really just my natural demeanor. It just really didn't suit me. So anyway, she's the one who came to me and let me know that the state of Arizona had added to it's one of the 6 classical state ombuds offices here in the country, was adding a position to its team for a licensed attorney to handle and be an ombuds for specifically public record and open meeting law disputes. And I won't get into that, but long story short, I had experience in both those areas, so I knew a little something about it. Anyway, interviewed. So I should say, I had no idea what an ombudsman was. So my first course of action, right, was to go to the computer, like ombudsman, like what would I even be doing? What is this ombudsman role? So did a little homework, applied, ended up getting it, and that was my introduction to the ombuds world.
Oh, interesting. Just walked up and grabbed you, huh?
Yeah, it really did.
And it's interesting in terms of your background in terms of looking into that as far as the whole public records and public hearings piece. I could use some help with that right now in New Mexico, but we won't go there. But no, that's very interesting. And the other piece to this is, I would assume, in terms of as you were moving through your career, realizing that, well, the adversarial process was not really what you were interested in. I'm assuming that's what also led you to going into organizational ombuds position as opposed to an advocate model, where you would be very much, I would think, caught in that same adversarial type of situation.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, I mean, again, if I'm being fully honest, my transition from classical to organizational also kind of found me. I was recruited through LinkedIn, of all things, and really at that point didn't fully understand the distinction between the two roles. I mean, I had an inkling, but I didn't really know. I was still pretty new to the profession. And anyway, but went through the interview process, and it seemed like a great opportunity. And it really, it was a learning curve, because as I got into that role, I quickly realized where my, attorney training and attorney skills really suited me well for the classical role, especially for the type of work I was doing in particular. This was a whole new world, right? It was a lot more about, interpersonal communication, interpersonal relationships, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution. I wasn't reading and interpreting and applying laws all day and helping guide people and provide advice. I was helping people do like all that emotional work and deal with the relational issues, which is really a different approach.
Yeah, dealing with high conflict personalities, I take it. Yes.
Yeah, Biff.
Yeah.
Biff. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Bill Eddy, and I actually do a workshop using his all of his great research and his work on the brief, informative, friendly, and firm. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes, very familiar with that.
This is amazing, and see all of these skills coming that we use in other areas of ADR coming into this ombuds area. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it does all come together. And I think one of the questions that, that might come up and talk about is that overlap, right? Between, attorney skills, mediator skills, ombud skills, like where are they aligned? Where are they different? How does that play? We can certainly talk about that. But here I am now as an organizational ombuds. So worked in corporate and now in higher ed. And I don't know, do you want me to talk more about that, or do you have other questions, Richard?
well, I'm going to kick it over to Jennifer here, because otherwise I will just monopolize the hour, which I don't want to do that. But I do have some other questions for you that we'll touch on in a little bit in terms of the whole educational aspect of things, and not necessarily higher ed, but maybe some questions with regard to K-12, and just a little teaser there in terms of possibly special education. I know we have a couple of people in the meeting today that have background in that particular area. And in fact, I will note Jason Harper is on with us today, and he was the last person that we featured in the How I Made It series. Of course, Jason has background in special education, and one of the things that we talked about was the need for content area expertise. But I will just leave that right there and kick it over to Jennifer.
Okay, that's a great teaser, Richard. I think that tells us there's a lot of great stuff coming up for our education advocates. I think it would be really helpful to, before we get into specialty areas, to take a little step back. Tell us what you do at the University of Colorado. What kind of disputes come in your door? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? Who are you working with?
Great question. So I think I already mentioned, I'll just reiterate for people on the call, as an organizational, ombuds, we're operating under 4 tenets, right? So we're there as a confidential, informal, impartial, and independent resource. And I'll talk more about how that plays in. But really our jurisdiction, I'm speaking, of course, of my role at the university, because it does vary, like I said, right? Even different organizational ombuds programs will vary in who they serve and how they approach things and what they do. But at the university, we serve pretty much anyone who has a university-related concerns, or for University of Colorado Boulder concern. We have 4 campuses, so I want to specify that. But it can, primarily it's staff, students, and that's undergrad and graduate, and faculty. But we do hear from parents. In fact, I've got a parent consultation right after this today, and really anyone who has a concern. And so while we might not be able to directly help, like contractors or others that might be more external constituents, we can certainly help. We can certainly hear them out, right? Hear them out, and then help point them in the right direction and connect them to the correct people to work with them. But we, people will reach out. They can come with us, and I'll talk more about the types of issues, but they can come with us with anything, literally, everything from those interpersonal disputes, communication concerns, all the way up through the ranks to concerns about, are they being discriminated against? They have concerns of being sexually harassed. Maybe they have concerns about financial fraud in their unit or research misconduct in one of our institutes. So it's quite a wide range. Of course, student issues, vary as far as, interpersonal disputes with professors or grade disputes. Abrasive conduct comes up a lot, and that's, as you know, a pretty broad definition of different, that's much broader than just bullying, right? It can be a lot of things. So really, like I said, really any issue. I'm just trying to think some of the ones, with our graduate students, a lot of the concerns could be like procedural type concerns with especially international students, like with visas or other things that come up, unfair treatment, advisor relationships, not getting the career development or mentoring they think that they need or deserve. So that just kind of gives you a little, flavor. So it's really quite broad. So when they reach out to our office, we schedule an initial consultation. They're no less than 90 minutes. And our main goal there is to really hear them out, right? Really hear what's going on. Let them just get it out. Sometimes we're the first person they've talked to. Sometimes they've been through the ringer, right? They've gone through the university and they're just not getting what they need, or they're not getting the, answers to their questions. So we hear them out. We'll ask a lot of questions. So part of our role is oops, are you all hearing that too?
Yes.
Okay. I'm like, did I just go into like the Twilight Zone? What just happened?
It's
Okay.
the big voice.
Okay. So, it's really hearing them out and asking a lot of questions. So I want them to get it out, but then we also need to ask questions to get clarity and understanding, and also to, for lack of a better term, push back a little bit, challenge some of the assumptions that we're hearing, offer different perspectives and possibilities to get them thinking, outside their own box a little bit. And so we spend a lot of time doing that. And then once we get through that and we really identify, like, what do they want? They say, we all know positions and interests. So they say they want this, but why do they want that? What's really driving them? What's really motivating them? What's their needs? And what's getting in their way, right? What's getting in their way from accomplishing that? And talking through all that, and then identifying, once we've untangled the issues and compartmentalized them, helping them identify, well, what are the options, right? And different issues might have different options available. We talk through all of those pros, cons, right? Potential ramifications for any given option. Because one of the things with organizational ombuds that I want to say now before I forget is that we don't dictate what they do. We don't give them, legal advice or even really advice at all. We're helping guide them to come to their own conclusion about what makes sense for them. What do they want to do next? Because literally they own that next step, which is very different than other channels that you might find in any organization, right? HR, compliance, going up the chain of command. You lose a little bit of control. So here with ombuds, they own control of that next step. So once we've gone through the options, then we help them strategize, right? They let us know what they want to do, and we help them strategize a path forward. Sometimes it includes us, and sometimes it doesn't. Like sometimes I might just be helping them navigate other resources or systems or processes to help them and empower them to go and take care of it themselves. Maybe it's coaching them to have a difficult conversation that they need to have in order to move forward. We can help them seek information and get clarity, and we can do that anonymously. And then we kind of get involved if they want, right? And it's all voluntary. We can do what we call shuttle diplomacy. We can, and if I need to define that, I can, but we need to do, we can do mediations. And then we also do a lot of training. And I'm just real quick, I know I'm getting a little long-winded here, but real quick, I just want to touch on, because I'm thinking people in the audience like, okay, that's great for the individual, but what's in it for the organization? Like, why would an organization want an ombuds, right? So there's things that we do, right? I think we add value and we benefit both, right? The individuals involved as well as the organizations, which is really the crux of our role, right? We're not there as an agent. We're not there as a representative. We're there to see all perspectives and take that into consideration to help people find equitable paths forward. So for the organization, we help them identify systemic issues or trends early, right? Things that they may not be recognizing are kind of coming their way. We help, the campus staff and other constituents handle conflict effectively and responsibly and in a healthy manner. And we can provide upward feedback, or some people would call it outward feedback, to campus stakeholders about what's going on. Because keep in mind, we have probably the broadest view on campus, right? Who does HR work with? Staff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who does academic affairs work with? Faculty and academic administrators, right? So there's really no other unit on campus that's hearing and talking and hearing, like seeing all these things from all the constituents. So that really puts us in a unique position to connect dots and see trends or systemic problems that others on campus, of no fault of their own, just would never see. There's just no reason they would see it. But I would also say, so in that sense, right, we're risk mitigators. Even though we're not advocating for the university, we are helping them mitigate risk, right? We're reducing the possibility of things escalating or things getting to the point of litigation. And then this is a whole different webinar, but I would argue to say that we, foster institutional trust and ethics. And I actually do a presentation on just that for our law school each year. So yeah. So I'm going to stop there. But in addition to all that, right, we provide training, workshops, presentations. I'm the manager of in our office for all of that. We have a lunch and learn series that we do too. It's a webinar series that we've been doing through COVID and will continue. And we just touch on all different topics and do fireside chats with authors and other people of interest. And we have a blog and we have a Twitter account. So I manage and write for those as well.
Wow, sounds very busy.
It is busy.
Just a couple of comments here, and then I'll say anything else. But as I'm kind of working backwards in terms of when you say why an ombuds, why would an organization want an ombuds department or person, and from an organization perspective. But what I'm hearing you say there is you're really looking at the organizational climate. And anybody that's been involved in a large organization, if you can walk in to a building or an organization and you can feel the climate in terms of what's going on there. And if there's just dispute at every corner, the climate is on a very low ebb. And so it's interesting that, like I say, you have a view of every department, every aspect in terms of what you're doing. And then what I'm hearing you in terms of the skill sets, I was just kind of jotting some.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing you say you work below the line quite a bit.
Yeah. That is a very insightful observation. Yeah. Yes. That's pretty much 90% of our work is below the surface.
Exactly. But then using just some of the classical training and skills that we all use, reality checking in terms of, evaluative type of mediation, if you're that type of mediator, the reality checking that you're providing an individual, identifying the barriers, exploring options. I mean, gosh, this sounds like a true neutral's job. So
I'm glad. It makes me happy to hear you say that, Richard.
Yeah. That's what I'm hearing. So that's really quite interesting. My question, aside from those comments, is we do have a fair number of mediators who are entrepreneurial types. They're not interested in necessarily working for a large organization, but are there opportunities for an ombuds person to work as a contractor? And is that something that exists? Is that
So I'm probably the least qualified person to talk to that. However, I will share what I know, which is it does exist. There are folks, and if people on this call are interested in connecting with those folks, I do have a couple names that are popping into my head as I'm sharing this. That I could connect them with to learn more about how that works and how they do it, because I can't really speak to the logistics of it, but it does exist. Just kind of giving a high level view, most classical ombuds, working are in government, right? Public sector. Right. But you're right, most organizational ombuds do work for an entity, whether it be a government entity, higher ed, K through 12, prisons, healthcare. The list goes on. Corporate, of course. I don't want to forget my corporate friends out there. So a lot of time, mostly it is, like you're saying, in-house. But yeah, it exists. People do that. So for those entrepreneurs out there, it's a thing. It really it is.
That might be something that we could ask at the end, if you could provide, if you're willing to give your contact information, so people might be able to reach out in terms of that. I can think of 3 people that are on this call right now that would be interested in that.
Okay, great. No, I'll definitely put my email in the chat before we end the meeting.
Thank you. I should probably kick it back over to Jennifer here at this point.
Thank you, Richard. Before we push forward, there were a couple of questions in the chat that were specific to what you were speaking to. So I thought maybe before we move too far away from that topic, I can go ahead and read them if you want, and if you want to respond to them. The first one was, how do you manage any perception by employees that you're on the side of the university rather than a neutral there to help them?
Yeah, is that the one? Okay, that's the first one there. I'm just looking at that. Yeah,
it goes on a little further, but I think
I think you got the essence of it though. Yeah, the buy-in. So we do not, and this person, I don't want to say names, but this person does use the term client. So we do not consider anyone our client. We do not consider the institution our client or the individuals coming to us. We call them, it's called a term of art, but our industry term, if you will, is visitor. Other people use different things. It's not, it's not ironclad, but that's what most of us call them, as our visitors. But it's building the it's building the relationships, and just providing education about who we are and what we do to establish that neutrality. I mean, neutrality, a lot of that is perception, right? And so, there's actually a lot of seminars that we go to about, can we really be neutral? And I think we've now actually, our standards of practice have transitioned to the term impartial, because we're looking at all perspectives. I mean, can anyone truly be neutral? I mean, I could go on all day about our own implicit biases, right, that are going to probably taint how we ask a question or what questions we ask some people but not others, right? I mean, can any human being actually be 100% neutral? That's a conversation for much debate. But as impartial, our role is to be there to hear all sides and to help people make their own decisions. And again, we're not the decision maker, right? We're not making any decisions. We have no power to overcome decisions, change policy, change procedures. All we can do is provide the information, provide what we're hearing to the people that do have the power to do that. So it's even more, I would say, even more impartial or neutral than like a judge in a court case, right? Who is rendering a decision. We're not doing that. We're really there as almost like, I don't know, I've never used this word before, but this one popping into my head, which is like a liaison, right? We're liaisoning information and helping people move forward and helping people resolve things in a way they feel is equitable.
Great, thank you. And
I don't know, hopefully, does that answer it? Do you think that, I don't know if that answers it.
I think it answers the question. The other thing that you might want to touch on, because there was a subsequent question that really was in the same area, but spoke a little bit in terms of the term in terms of trust. And if that might be something that you might be able to expand on a little bit in terms of as you're working with an individual that has come to you with a concern.
Yeah. So again, I mean, there's a couple things come to mind when it comes to building trust. One is the ombuds needs to have the skills to build rapport quickly, right? And I think we do that before the visitor. I'm going to go on a limb here and say I think we really start doing that before anyone even contacts our office, right? We don't hide in our office, right? We're out there. We're marketing our office. We're out there doing presentations. We're meeting with people. We're doing trainings. We are putting a face to the name, if you will, as well as again and again ad nauseum explaining who we are, what we do, right, and how we work. And when people start to hear that and they get to know us in different contexts, whether it be through trainings or presentations that we're doing or looking at our website or whatever it is, they have to have some trust, right, to even contact our office, right? I mean, otherwise they wouldn't even bother contacting us. So I think most people, by the time they get to us, they already have some level of trust that we are going to do what we say we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And then it's a matter of building that rapport when you're meeting with a person, whether it be in person or on Zoom or on the phone or whatever it is. And that's often done by, truly listening to them, and doing all the things that you on the call who are mediators and attorneys know, right? Which is asking questions, letting them know they've been heard, right? Validating their feelings, acknowledging what they're saying, reframing and maybe paraphrasing back to them what you're hearing to make sure you're getting it right, right? When we do those things, and that's where the skill overlap comes that you're talking about, Richard, right? I mean, those are all skills that we do in our the other professions, mediation and an attorney as well, because we need to build that rapport and that trust. As far as, if I may, from the other side of the fence, from the organizational side or from the leaders, so to speak, I mean, and keep in mind, right, like our visitors are everything from frontline employees to the chancellor of the university, right?
Right.
like leadership comes to us too, sometimes for individual issues and problems they're having, but also sometimes for more like systemic. They want a different perspective on a process or a procedure or a systemic issue they're seeing. They want to come to us and say like, well, what do you think? Like, what are you seeing? Right. What input do you have? Like they come to us for coaching as well. So keeping that in mind. So, to the second point about that, again, it's through all the things I've already described, but also in our office, at least, we have a spreadsheet of all kind of like the key stakeholders, leaders of all the different units on campus, and we meet with them regularly. And it can just be like to check in, because contrary to what some organizational ombuds might say, and I don't know if this is so much true anymore, we're not an island. Nor should we be. We should not be isolating ourselves. Some people say, well, to be independent, impartial, like you must have to like have like an ironclad fence around you. Like, no, like you need to be out there. You need to be building relationships. We have no official authority or power, right? So our power is our influence. And
Right.
I think most people on this call, I would hope, would agree that to be influential and to have any influence and to build that trust, people need to see you as trustworthy, incredible, and competent.
Right.
Right. And so going out there and having those meetings and talking to people and getting to know them on a professional level, I'm not saying go out and have beers with them after work, but, getting to know them on a professional level and building that rapport, and asking, not only, again, reiterating what we do and how we work, but also asking them like, how are things going with you? How are you? What's keeping you up at night? What are the issues you're seeing? How can we best support you? Because we're there to support everybody, right? How can we best collaborate with you, support you? We want to be for us on the campus, we want to be a campus partner, right? And that's how we see ourselves.
One of the things that you said right off the bat here, and when I mentioned trust, market, the office, and the process, and then you've elaborated on that, which is just those words, marketing, the office, and the process, and I could just see that, and that also just to me brings to mind the term transparency, and so then if you're really doing that, then people are seeing what you're doing. You're very transparent in terms of what's going on, and then that would, of course, enhance the trust that we're looking to get. So that's very
and follow through, right? I mean, do what you say you're going to do, and don't do what you say you're not going to do, right? I mean, that's a surefire way to lose that immediately.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. No, that's fabulous. Very interesting. Very interesting. There was, if I can go over to the kind of the educational piece just for a second, because there's a question that I have there along those lines, and and it speaks to the training. So yeah, that's the thing. What do you need to do in terms of what sort of training do you really need to go through in terms of, is it necessary to be an attorney, to be an ombudsperson or an ombuds? If you're looking at, my thought in terms of the situation, other than just kind of falling into it, it sort of came to you as you've indicated, but in terms of, most of the, or a high number of the people within the SCMA, our membership, they have done a number of things in past lives, if you will. And so they have content area expertise in lots of areas, lots of experiences. And so you've got that. And then what else do you need in terms of if you're really thinking about going into this as a field, as a profession, as a career, in terms of what are the steps and what do you do?
Yeah. So I really wish I had a simple answer for that. I really wish I could just give you a checklist and be like, check, check, check. It's just not that easy. So, and again, it depends on what model, right? Which path you want to go down with the ombuds if you're going in that direction.
Well, let me interrupt you if I may.
Yeah.
Is this profession, is this a growing profession?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I would say yes.
Mm-hmm. In that sense, of the three different categories in terms of traditional, organizational, and advocacy, which of the three, or are they all three, growing? And would that make any difference in terms of what your path would be if you thought you're listening
Oh,
to
that's interesting.
here today and you go, boy, this just sounds like just exactly what I want to do, but I don't know if I've got the skills to go there. But you know,
Mhm.
then it's a matter of looking at, okay, well, maybe what's the model? Maybe that's the way to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you need to get that analytical, but yes, I mean, you could approach it that way for sure. And I mean, I'll just answer your first question. So for none of them, you do not have to be an attorney for any of them.
Right.
So there's no, you know, to the best of my knowledge, and I've only been a classical and an organizational, there's no like set criteria as far as like pedigree, right? Like you don't have to have any certain degrees. And if you look at the different job listings, you know, and you can look at those at the ombudsblog.com or on the International Ombudsman Association website, there's different places you can see those. You'll see the job descriptions and the requirements, whatever you want to call them, vary. So you will see some common themes. And what do I mean by that? At least in the organizational ombuds world, you're going to see themes like they want an advanced degree, but that could be a JD, that could be a master's of something they want, and they'll often be looking for something that is at least conflict resolution related, right? They want to see you have at least some experience or education in that arena to some extent. You might see certain positions require so many years of already ombudsman or related experience, right? So it's really going to vary on the role, and if they're feeling like a director position versus they want to bring in new associates to kind of learn the ropes, because the ombuds role itself, once you get past that first initial like criteria, most of it's on the job training. Now there are organizations out there for the organizational ombuds. International Ombuds Association provides a foundations course, which many aspiring ombuds take before getting an ombuds role, and most new organizational ombuds will take. And of course, regional groups and others provide other like foundational type courses for folks as well. The United States Ombudsman Association, which caters primarily to classical and public sector ombuds, also offers a new ombudsman training. But again, that's usually after they've already been hired because they've met the initial criteria and they need to learn how to actually now do this job.
Right.
and it's really on the job. I mean, I'll just tell you, like, I mean, I'm just speaking from my own experience, right? So it's really on the job training. And of course, I mean, people, hopefully they're self-starters and they want to learn, because it's a lot of, as you know, reading, you know, going to who the experts are, reading, doing your own professional development, you know, to really learn how to develop the skills that you may be missing, right? And then, you know, improve the ones that you already have.
Right. So to piggyback on this and to go into, you know, more directly into my question with regard to education, and I know that you're
Yeah.
working in higher education right now, and I don't know if and this also tails to whether this is a growing profession. We've had, like, as I mentioned, Jason Harper was our last guest. He works in special education. I work in special education and resolution. I see right now, given what's going on in terms of post-COVID, there's a number of disputes that are burgeoning, that are just bubbling up right now in terms of services that weren't provided, and where I think that school districts could benefit from having an organizational ombudsperson. And I'm wondering whether you're seeing that at all in terms of in your within your scope, as far as public education starting to pick up people in this position to try and resolve these disputes before they come up to a level of due process hearings.
Yeah. So, I mean, the quick answer is yes. And of course, like with most professions, like it ebbs, like the opportunities ebb and flow, right? Ombuds programs come, ombuds programs go. Our goal is to just kind of keep an upward trend, if you will, right? Keep more opening than closing. But K through 12, is definitely getting traction. And I know you and I talked a little bit yesterday, special education's getting traction. You know, I did a quick Google search after our call and I found several states that have special ed ombuds programs by statute. Some were more classical in nature, and there was one, I think it was Virginia, that seems to be truly an organizational ombuds role. And I know, and I think she's in the audience, Kimberly Shoelist. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Yes. So she, as you may know, wrote a paper on the concept of a special education ombuds, and it hits a nail on the head. I mean, there's so many areas, right, that could use or benefit from ombuds programs, but certainly K through 12 special education are all great, because it really serves as that early dispute resolution mechanism. Like, let's try to address as much as we can and deal with the hard, emotional, relational issues as well, right? To not only address the acute, maybe presenting issue or issues, but also look at the big picture. Like, how are we going to continue to, whether it be work together or serve, whatever it is, how are we going to either repair or at least get the relationship to a point where we can come to work or come to school or whatever it might be in peace, and be productive and respectful. And, like I always start my mediations with, when I have, interpersonal disputes, like, the goal isn't to leave here best friends. Not my goal. The goal is to get to a point where you can address the issues that exist and come to some kind of agreements for how you're going to move forward in a productive, healthy working environment, right? And it's up to them to come up with those agreements to make that work.
Right. And this is where I just feel like what you're doing as an ombuds person, as an ombuds, highly needed in K-12 education. I'm glad to see that, or hear that you're seeing that evolve and starting to grow.
Absolutely.
So that's encouraging. And the people in the audience that are interested in this area, I would encourage you to pursue this. So thank you, Liz.
Yeah, definitely. I think there was another question, Jennifer, in the chat about sexual violence allegations. Do you want me to touch on that one?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do it? There's a couple of good questions in the chat, and I know we're trying to, this is such an intriguing conversation, and there's so much we want to touch on in the short amount of time that we have. So if you want to address that question, and then I have a couple more questions for you about opportunities in the field.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so that question was in the chat. If everyone, there's several good questions. We'll try to get to all of them, but there was a question in the chat that says, Liz, have you been pulled into sexual violence allegations at the university? If so, what was your role in the process?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Thanks for asking that. So, those are obviously some of the more difficult and challenging situations that end up on, on our doorstep. And the answer is yes. We do have visitors that come to us on both sides, right? Visitors that come to us who maybe have been the victim of these kinds of acts, and then we also have the people who are being accused of perpetrating these kinds of acts. And so our role, again, is to do like we would with any visitor, right? Hear them out, hear what's going on, and really try to understand what they need and what they want. And, during the option part of the conversation that we talked about earlier, of course, and hopefully all those compliance people out there this will make them happy. We discuss all the reporting options, right? Because when we're going through the list of options, we're also discussing all informal and formal options that exist within the organization, in my case, within the university. And so we do have on our university a group of folks that are dedicated to handling these kinds of allegations and these situations, and they have processes and procedures, and there's different ways to go about it. And so our role is to really help educate the visitor on what those are. And and of course, we're the expert on our organization, but of course, the people who deal with those allegations are really the experts on their process and policies. But sometimes people don't want to go and ask them, right? There's that fear, right? Because then once they bring it up, now there's mandatory reporters involved, and like they lose control of a situation potentially. So they come to us first, which is great, because we really are a great avenue before any decision is made on what to do, to come to us. Let's vet through all the options. I can make hypothetical phone calls, right, to the people in those units to say, here's a situation, hypothetically, what would happen next, or what would the options be for this person. Sometimes when we've been in person, I've done that on speakerphone. I let the person know I've got a visitor here, because they know what we do, right? Who we are. I've got a visitor here. They would like to remain anonymous. Here's what's going on. But really helping them explore like what that process was, so they can make an informed decision about whether they want to report it or whether they want to, I know the person who asked the question said sexual violence. Sometimes it's more like sexual harassment, but if it's sexual violence, right, we would probably focus more on the reporting processes, and what their rights are and what they can do if they want to take those next steps. But ultimately it's up to them. So on our university, we are not, as ombuds, and I know, don't gasp too loudly, attorneys out there, but we are not mandatory reporters. So even when people come to, unless there's an imminent risk, right, a future imminent risk of physical harm, we have no obligation to share the information or report it, which is another unique feature, which is why people come to ombuds before going to HR, before going to compliance, because once they do, there's a record of it and they lose control of it.
Really interesting. Really interesting.
Yes.
Jennifer, should I ask our favorite question, or do you want to?
Go ahead, Richard.
So, Liz, what's the one thing no one told you about, either in terms of pursuing the career as an ombudsperson or becoming an ombudsman, and that you wish you would have known in advance?
Yeah, so there's so many things, but I think what stands out the most to me is, and fortunately in my case, it comes somewhat naturally to me to do this, but no one really emphasized, and I mentioned this earlier, the importance of building relationships, right? The importance of getting out there, getting to know your constituents, getting to know the leaders, because, really one of the worst things, and and this has happened to me, so I know how awful and awkward it is having to go to a leader to share some really awful information and need to have a really difficult conversation with them, usually about someone that they do have a relationship with, right? Who they probably do really like and respect, right? And to have to deliver that and have that conversation when they have no idea who I am. Why should they even meet with me? Why should they talk to me, right? So that's why I go back to the importance of having those relationships, so that when I call so-and-so, they understand who I am, they understand what I do, they trust me, and they can actually hear what I'm trying to tell them.
Right. That goes back to marketing the office and marketing the process, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Yes, full circle for sure.
Very-
And if I may, I just want to touch on the sexual violence thing, because I didn't mention, I just want to make it clear that we would also, of course, let that individual know all the available resources they have for, support. Like we have Office of Victim Assistance, we have counseling, and those are all free services to our staff, faculty, and students. So we always make sure they're fully informed on all of those services as well.
Right. And there's kind of a second part to my question too, and that is, what's the best piece of advice that you ever received before going into the ombuds position?
Ooh, I love that one. Yes. So one of my mentors when I first started, just could not emphasize enough, and I think this is spot on, right? The importance of asking questions,
Mhm.
actually listening to the answers, right? Not preparing what I'm going to say next, or what I think, and that like temptation to be like, well, here's what you should do, right? Like, no. It's not about me. It's not about Liz. It's about the person. They have to do what's right for them. But I would say the most important nugget at the end of that was, do not fill silences. Silences are your best friend,
I like that.
because when there's a silence and you just sit back and wait for it, that's the big reveal, right? That's often the golden nugget of information that you just spent 3 hours with this person,
Yeah.
right? And up there it is,
Yeah.
right?
I just wrote that one down. I'm taking it. That's great.
I think we need to do a webinar on that.
That's beautiful. That's really, really good. Jennifer, Anything else from you? I know we're getting close, I think.
We are, and yeah, and there's also one of the newer dispute resolution books. I think it's Alexander Carter, who she talks all the time about land the plane. In other words, ask the question and then don't insert your input. So I think that's what you're saying, and that's a great point. Easier said than done.
Especially for attorneys.
Yeah. There was a question in the chat. It was a basic question, but I think it's such a great question. And because I think that a lot of people that are tuning in today are maybe interested in this in the field, and they're trying to figure out if this is a match for them. And the question is, what does a typical day look like? It sounds like you may not have a typical day, but tell us, a couple of sentences what it looks like. What are you doing in a typical day?
Yeah. So typical is definitely not the right word for what we do. But if I were to look at my calendar, right, and I do a lot of volunteer work. So keep in mind, right, that I volunteer for the International Ombuds Association. I volunteer for the ABA, as you mentioned during my intro. So you'd see a lot of those meetings on my calendar as well. But typically 2 to 3 visitors a day. And again, those are 90-minute meetings to start with. And then it kind of goes from there, depending on how that visitor decides to move forward. Those can, blossom into, me with permission only, because we can also reach out if they give us permission to connect with other people, or to do some follow-up with people to get information, or to invite other people to the table, so to speak, right, to hear their perspective. And then potentially that might blossom into a mediation or a group facilitation. So you never know where a consultation is going to go. It could be a one and done. It could turn into a 6-month endeavor, right? It just kind of varies. So that, and then of course, as I mentioned, I might be preparing for a presentation that I'm doing like today, right? Or a webinar that I'm teaching, or I might be writing for my, the blog. Or I might be doing other, projects, meeting with people on campus. And part of that too is with the training piece. I do a lot of collaboration with the other people on campus who train, because the last thing I want to do is step on toes, right? Like I don't want a territorial, I'm not looking to, right? So collaborating with them to see like who's offering what, where can we help fill in gaps, what can we do to serve the community. So a lot of time spending on trainings and presentations and things of that nature. But that I would say is a typical, but a lot of times it does require follow up, and sometimes we're doing it anonymously. Sometimes we have permission to share the individual's information, but trying to help get whatever information that individual needs so that they can move forward.
Very good.
I like the no typical day piece. Back to my earlier comment, I think I may have missed my calling, but it really it sounds like a fabulous profession. I know that you are working hard in terms of this, but I think you're having way too much fun.
I love it.
Yeah.
I do. I love it. My husband can't wrap his head around it, but I get excited every morning when I get up. I'm excited to go to work. I probably work, I work when I don't have to work. Because I love it. I enjoy it. And
That's awesome.
I think that's half the battle, right?
Yeah, well, that's the mark of a really great career too, in terms of what that is. That's something that we all, of course, aspire to be in that situation. So that's exciting. So it is, and it comes through listening to you. So that's
well,
really
thank you. I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, I'm definitely, of course, hopefully people here get the sense that, I'm willing to talk about it. I know, because I don't like to talk, but but I'm happy to talk about it and answer questions, because I'm sure people have questions, and help direct people. And I would say people who are interested, right, get involved. That's going to be first and foremost. Think about which path you want to go, and then get involved with those organizations. There's 4 main organizations here in the U.S. that serve different ombuds groups. I mentioned 2. There's also a coalition of federal ombuds, and there's also the long-term care ombuds have their own organization. So get involved, volunteer, network, right? And that's probably the best way to start approaching it.
I don't know exactly. I keep waiting. I know we are getting right towards the end here, and so I don't want to monopolize things. But I when you said, and I forget exactly the term used, but let me ask you this: Do you know if the armed forces use ombudspersons in terms of this? Because we have certainly veterans that I know come in and come back to work. This could be an exciting place to work. And what made me think about that when you were talking about talking with the chancellor of the university, in the military, in this type of situation, the disputes are all up and down the chain of command. And so you could be, from the very bottom in terms of a gunnery sergeant or or all the way up to the commander of the base. So I'm just wondering what you're seeing there.
Yeah, I'm not as well versed, so I don't want to, for those in the audience who might know better than I don't want to speak out of turn. I do know that some military branches do have ombuds programs. However, I think they're even a little bit different than the ones I've already described. I think they're more of, and this is just based on what little I know. The ones I can think of are for like families, right? They're like family ombuds, to help the families of people who are serving, who are running into issues, or to navigate the system, or to resolve issues that might come up. So kind of an organizational ombuds approach, specifically for the military, for the person who's serving's families.
Right, and that's what made me think about. I'm very well aware of the family advocacy program within both the Marine Corps and the Navy, and so I was wondering whether within that there actually may be an ombudsperson, but I'll leave.
And one of our audience members just reminded me, yes, the VA does have their own. In fact, she's a co-chair of our IOA conference committee, but yes, they do have their own ombuds program. Yes.
So.
Right.
Jennifer,
it's a very small community if you haven't figured out. We all know each other, all the ombuds.
Jennifer,
this has been, go ahead.
Any closing remarks, Jennifer, from you, please?
I think this has just been a great conversation that could probably go on for many more hours. I want to point out, because there's so many, different avenues and, so much to discuss, but I wanted to point out that Liz was kind enough to put her email in the chat for anyone that would like to reach out to her for questions or more information. So we really appreciate that.
Sure. And I'm also going to put our website if people just want to, because I obviously couldn't cover everything. If they want to get a better idea of like what our office does in particular, they can go there and check it out. And they can see our lunch and learns and some of our other materials there as well.
Nice. Liz, I can't thank you enough. It's been a pleasure to meet you. And this has been just an exciting hour. And I just thank you again.
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me. This was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, that is it. Thank you so much, Liz, for taking the time and being a part of this How I Made It series with SCMA. Thank you to Jennifer and to Richard for getting Liz on here, because it really is such a fascinating topic. And I think it really has sparked a lot of interest for the people who are in the audience and also for our members. Again, thank you everybody for joining us today. Our recording will go out next week. And if anybody is interested in the recording, it will be available on our webinar library next week as well. So thank you. I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Thank you, Bouvier.
Okay, thanks.